Okay, welcome to episode 2 of AJ Aircraft's RCTEK, Sealing Hinge Gaps. Today's tech tip comes to us from XFC pilot Dean Lampron, also AJ Aircraft team pilot, and it's really important to seal the hinge gaps. Here you'll notice a diagram that sort of shows you sort of a layout of why we should seal hinge gaps and from a performance perspective, why that's really important. So here you'll see I'm just taking the time to sort of go through. I'm going to tighten up all the covering. I'm using the elevator surface on the ARS 300 to as a as the plane that we're going to choose to do this on today. But we're going to tighten up all the covering, get everything nice and tight before we go in and actually work on sealing the hinge gaps. But as you can see from that diagram, that it, from a performance perspective and an airflow perspective, it's extremely important to seal your hinge gaps. And even some of the most experienced pilots skip this step in their builds. And this is something that I would say is really important to go back to and make sure you get done. So as you can see here, I'm just tightening up the covering, real basic stuff. Everybody knows how to do this. So I'll get this sped up here so we can get to how to seal your hinge gaps easily. All right, so just as I'm finishing this up, getting all the covering tight, you might as well do all of that, getting all the covering tight here while you're in this process because you'll have your iron on um, and at the same time. So here you can see everything's tight and we're going to go ahead and now we're going to measure. So we're going to take a ruler and we're going to flex the elevator. We're going to measure both halves of the bevel. Um, so if this side's 1 millimeter and the other side's or a quarter of an inch and the other side's a quarter of an inch, you're going to take a half inch strip, and every plane will be different. And the other thing you want to do is you can see what I'm doing right here is you just want to make sure that all the covering is down in the gap already. So a lot of times factories and manufacturers um, don't really do a great job of sealing that hinge gap. So you want to make sure you seal that. Again, measure it. And so whatever the measurement of is that combined, you're going to cut this piece. And the key is obviously to fold it perfectly in half, as you can see here. Nice and tight fold. And I cut this the length of the elevator. But now what you're going to do is you're going to actually get it in there exactly where you're going to iron it, and with a Sharpie on the outside of the covering, not the inside of the covering. So I'm marking on the paper exactly where the hinges are. Now, um, once you get that marked, and you'll see that I have each hinge marked, and just make this line a little bit um, bigger here. I have each hinge marked. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take, there's a couple ways to do this. You can take a hole punch, which is the easiest way, and just go through and punch a hole on every one of those lines. And essentially what you're doing is you're making a open slot for the hinge. Well, my hole punch is broke, unfortunately, so I'm just going to cut these out. I'm going to cut little half moons out, and you can see once I get that cut out, you can see that this will perfectly lay down in the hinge line, and it'll make room for your where your little hinge knuckle is, and it'll go right over that and it'll iron in there nice. So now what you want to do is make sure your hinge is flexed all the way, and lay your strip it right in the hinge line. And you're going to want to use a trim iron. I use my trim iron on high heat, like you can see here. And I make sure that that shoe is always perfectly clean. There's nothing on there. Um, I'm just going to go ahead and remove the backing on the white Ultra Coat. And you know, personal preference. Some people use clear, some people use white. It's up to you. So the key is just tack it down on one side while while your elevator is fully deflected. And you can see I'm just going to tack it down. And then what you want to do is you want to get, as I speed this up, you want to get down in the hinge line, and you just want to get that down as far as you can in the middle, like you can see I'm doing here with the shoe of my trim iron, and you just iron that all the way down. And you can see here I got it sped up. Make sure you get all the bubbles out, because you don't want anything getting in the way of this coming up, especially planes that use smoke oil and other things. You want to make sure that you have this ironed completely down, nice and tight. And then I use my big iron with a little bit more heat than my trim iron. The goal is you don't want to totally shrink this up. You just want to stick it down. So you don't want to use too much heat, or you'll start to shrink that down. So you can also take your linkage off here. I'm getting under my linkage, but you just do that and get your trim iron in there. Get around all those little hinge knuckles. Now you might think now my hinge gap is sealed. Um, but you got to sort of take it, if you really want this to work really well, you got to take it one step further. So you got the bottom of your hinge gap sealed. Now I like to turn it over and seal the top half. Now this time I cut my same strip, but now I'm using clear. And the reason I use clear is just for looks. You know, you got your design on the top of your plane. You want that to look nice. You don't want to have a big white blocky ultra coat in the middle of on the top. So now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to fold this over. We'll get it uh, nice and folded over. And now we're going to mark the hinges just like we did before. We're going to lay it in there exactly where it belongs. And we're going to mark that hinge line, or we're going to mark each hinge. And again, we'll cut this out with a pair of scissors, and then we'll iron it in. And the reason you want to do both the top and bottom is for a number of reasons. A, you don't it makes it a lot easier if you're flying gas and you're using smoke to clean out your hinge lines if it's sealed on the top and bottom. And that smoke oil will get into your hinge line if you only do the bottom, and it'll start soaking into that hinge line and start to lift the bottom of your covering. And before you know it, the bottom is peeling off and it's turning into a big mess on you. So here we're just doing the same thing. We're cutting out that hinge, the little hinge knuckle spots, and this makes this covering just lay down in the hinge line real perfect. So um, now we're using clear on the top. I'm using the clear, and the taking the backing off is a little bit difficult. So here's a little tip. Most of you probably already know, but for these small pieces, it's easy to just put some tape on there and use this to pull your, oops, gotta get it down, stuck down really good. I just use blue painter's tape and that'll just pull your backing right off for you. Little tip. Some people know it, some people don't. Um, and then we'll just repeat that. We're going to do the same thing. We're just going to iron this down, right, line it up, the holes right up, make sure the surface is fully deflected. And we're just going to set that in there real nice. And same thing with the trim iron on this side. And we'll just, same thing, we'll speed this up. But at any rate, this is a great tip to keep your plane operating correctly. No wind can get through. No, you're not degrading your surface authority or anything like that. Also, it's easy to keep the surface clean, and by sealing it on the top and the bottom, the air pressure flowing through there won't blow the bottom off. Smoke oil won't get in there and make the bottom tear off. This is a surefire way to make sure that your surface stays sealed the whole time and you're not doing maintenance halfway through the season. So this is our final, or this is our next AJ Aircraft Tech tip. So stay tuned for episode 3, And thank you for watching, and make sure you like and subscribe to our channel.